Hello and welcome to our webinar event. We're just going to take a moment to allow folks to join us this afternoon, and we will begin shortly. Thanks again to those of you who are joining us. We are just going to take another moment to allow a few more folks to join, and then we'll go ahead and get started in just about a minute. All right, we will go ahead and get started. Well, welcome and thank you all for joining us. Welcome to the Goldwater Institute's special live stream event about how we can teach our kids about freedom and American values and the things that really matter to all of us when our public schools, frankly, have failed to do so. Now, before we begin, I want to remind everybody who's watching this live, if you have questions for our guest at any time during the webinar, please go ahead and pull up your Q&A button and you can submit your questions there. I will monitor them and work them into our conversation. And you can do that at any time during the webinar. If you have remaining questions afterwards, please feel free to reach out to the Goldwater Institute and we'll get them answered. And also, I want to remind everybody who's watching today that we have a special discount code for you just in time for the holidays. If you visit www.tuttletwins.com, that's Tuttle twins.com, and use special code Goldwater, you will get 40% off the purchase price of the entire Tuttle Twins series, which is 12 books. So it'll make a perfect Christmas gift for children, or frankly, even adults. I own a set of my own just in time for Christmas or Hanukkah or whatever holiday it is that you celebrate. Now, I'm so excited to welcome a fellow freedom fighter and a very good friend of mine, Connor Boyack. Connor is the president of the Goldwater Institute, and they're based in Utah. They're a free market think tank and a really strong ally of the Goldwater Institutes, especially when it comes to important issues of education and educating our kids about core American values. But Connor, in his spare time, and I don't know how you find it, Connor, is also a prolific author. He has published over 30 books to date, and that, of course, includes the Tuttle Twins series, which has sold surprisingly and amazingly over 3 million copies. And I say surprisingly because for those of you who think that people out there are not buying books about freedom, Connor is going to prove you wrong today. So Connor, thank you so much for joining us today.
Christina, thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to our chat.
Well, Connor, me too. And, I think it's fair to say that parents today really are just overwhelmed. This was true a couple of years ago, but especially in COVID times, they're just overwhelmed. A growing number of schools are adopting what people see as this really politically charged, even racially divisive content. And that is becoming prioritized, frankly, over basic skills like reading, writing, arithmetic, and learning about core American values and American history. I really think this should come as no surprise to anyone because, frankly, the teachers' unions have been pushing politics over student learning for years, even before COVID, even before the pandemic. We saw in 2019 when the National Education Association got together, and that is the country's largest teachers' union, they were voting on a number of priorities. And one of the resolutions that the organization voted down was to make student learning a priority of the organization. So the organization rejected that. The union rejected student learning as a priority. And yet they adopted all sorts of political resolutions calling for things like foreign policy positions, positions on abortion, race reparations, and the like. So I think that really gives us an idea of where the teachers' unions, the politically powerful unions, are today. And of course, just recently, we heard the leader of the Los Angeles Teachers Union, which is a large school district, say, quote, "It's okay that our babies may not have learned all their times tables. They know the words insurrection and coup." And then she followed that up with, "Education is political," end quote. So again, parents are just, are understandably nervous that their kids are just being indoctrinated with politics, indoctrinated with these Marxist ideas, and not being taught basic American civics. Now, that is where you come in, because there is a solution for the parents out there who are nervous about this, and that's the Tuttle Twins. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who the Tuttle Twins are, and how you came up with this idea, because the Tuttle Twins have been around for a long time. They certainly predate COVID and the recent controversies in the classroom.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Christina, I run Libertas Institute in Utah. And when my kids were younger, this was in 2014, I would come home at the end of the day. And of course, I would ask them, "Tell me what you did today and how was your day?" And my 5-year-old, my oldest at the time, would start to reciprocate that question. He'd say, "What did you do today, Daddy?" And I'd say, like, I was on the phone a lot and I typed on a computer. Like, how do I talk to my 5-year-old about fighting eminent domain, right? Or how do I talk to him about what, socialism is and how I'm trying to like push back or whatever? So like any good dad, I turned to Amazon. And I tried searching for books that would help me teach, property rights or free markets or, values of liberty to kids. And look, there's books for potty training and the birds and the bees and like any topic under the sun. There wasn't anything from this perspective. There was a little bit about the Constitution for kids. There were some materials like that, but nothing about these core values and ideas and principles that America was founded on, these kind of founding father classical liberal ideas. So I was talking with a buddy of mine, Elijah, who's also a dad, and he kind of had the same desire. He wanted to teach his kids about these ideas. So we teamed up. He's the illustrator and I'm the author. And at the time we had no vision. It was just a fun little project. There was no like mastermind campaign for helping parents all over the world, combat the crazy woke left mob, or like there was no vision like that, in part because the crazy had not really fomented as it has, just in the past year or two, especially. So it's one of those things that we feel like, that quote that says something like, "When preparation meets opportunity." Like, we've been doing this for a few years, as you said, long before COVID. And we're just out there like, yeah, let's teach kids. And these are good ideas. And then the past couple of years, it's like, oh my gosh, every family needs the Tuttle Twins books. It is, an antidote to all the crazy that's happening out there. So we've definitely leaned into kind of the vision and the strategy and really building on a big campaign, because what we have seen, you mentioned several examples in your introductory remarks. What we've seen is parents have had the scales fall off their eyes a bit. And what I mean by that is a lot of parents that I've personally spoken with, and I think just in our society, have long had this romantic notion of public school, right? Like, oh, I went to public school when I was younger and it was great and I turned out fine. Therefore, I'm going to send my kids there and everything will be peachy. Not realizing that the world is very different and that the teacher training schools are very left-leaning and they're very much pumping out these political people who see the classroom as a platform through which to propagate their ideas of social justice. And so the world has changed quite a bit. And what COVID laid bare is that reality in the classroom. Parents now overhearing on Zoom school while their kid is at home, listening to class, hearing what the teacher is saying, reviewing the materials in more detail, news reports about, teacher activism and all these things. So many more parents have woken up to the reality that we cannot trust the public schools to teach our children the values that we have. There's a quote I like from a Christian pastor, which I'm going to apply in a political context. But what he says in his religious context is, why do Christians send their kids to Caesar's schools and then act surprised when those kids return home as Romans, right? So the political equivalent of that is, can we as conservatives and libertarians and others really be shocked if we surrender our children during their most formative years to the state's schools I mean, is the state ever going to teach that the state is bad? Are the
Right.
state schools ever going to teach the problems with government? Well, no, they cover them up. They teach that everything is rosy. And so we can't really act surprised if our kids turn out to be social justice warriors, if we are immersing them in an environment where they're just being bathed in these ideas. So look, I'm a big advocate of homeschooling. We homeschool our kids. I know that's not possible for everyone for a myriad number of reasons, but what I say to parents, and I'll end here, is that even if you can't pull your kids out of school or find some alternative for them, you have the burden and the duty and the opportunity to counteract in the home what your kids are getting, at school. You have to make sure to supplement, as a family around the dinner table or talking with your kids, the ideas and the values that they're getting quite the opposite of from their peers and their teachers and textbooks. And so it's that level of intentionality that's really important for parents to say, like, look, I know the schools aren't going to teach entrepreneurship, right? Or the golden rule or property rights or, individual freedom. So that's on me. And that's where the Tuttle Twins comes in to say, hey, parents, it's not all on you. Here we are to help. Get the books, lots of other materials that we have to help.
Yeah, no, it's really fantastic. And you're right that parents are starting to wake up to this. But I think, even now, it's very difficult for parents to know what their children are learning in school. You mentioned that, the schools try to hide it. I know both of our organizations have worked on making education more transparent in the public schools for parents. We're in court right now with parents who, simply asked questions of their schools. Can I see what you're teaching my kid in the classroom? Can you give me a basic syllabus? And they are thwarted, they are stymied, they are sued sometimes by schools just for asking those questions. They're hit with bills of tens of thousands of dollars to get that information, and yet if you Google Tuttle Twins, if you go to the website or if you go to Amazon, there's basically what you're teaching, what lessons you have for children right there, and parents can find that out and they can read about it. And so I think that's another great thing about sort of the free market solution that you're pursuing, is that not only are you teaching great lessons, but parents can find out what's in those books before they even purchase them. So why don't you tell us a little bit about what are you teaching in these books? Because I know there's a dozen for children, the basic set, and they span a myriad number of topics. I mean, there's basic topics that you might learn in school, like economics, but then there's also things like you said, entrepreneurship and concepts about coercion and persuasion. So, what are you trying to accomplish with this series, and what are some of the lessons that kids will learn if they pick up these books?
Yeah, I mean, I was taught economics in school. I hated it. It was all supply and demand curves. Like no one likes that kind of economics. That's super boring. We don't do any of that kind of stuff, right? Humans learn through storytelling. We learn through ideas and story. And so that's how all of our books are presented for anyone who's not familiar. So like here's the Tuttle Twins Learn About the Law, which is the first example or the first book in the series, and everything is fully illustrated with a story. So this one talks about the law, proper role of government, justice, individual rights. We have our version of iPencil. We call it the Tuttle Twins and the Miraculous Pencil, which is all about the free market and how we all work together collaboratively all over the world without even realizing that we're working together, but that it takes many people to even produce, obviously, a simple pencil, let alone complex things as well. We've got The Creature from Jekyll Island, which is all about the Federal Reserve, inflation, money. This is actually a big, of all of the books I hear that are favorites of kids, it's this one, in part because we have this scary monster, this creature from Jekyll Island, who is kind of the sinister antagonist going around raising prices mysteriously. So the twins have to figure out why prices keep going up. Of course, this book has no relevance at all to our modern world. So just bear that in mind, this antiquated idea of inflation that, you may not want your kids learning about. We have Fate of the Future, which is, as you mentioned, persuasion versus coercion. When we're trying to achieve important ideas in our society, should we do it through kind of top-down command and conquer and coercing people into doing what we think is right? Or should we operating based off of persuasion and voluntary relationships and letting people have the ability to choose? We have a book all about the golden rule, which is more of a social concept, even a religious concept. All the main religions have this kind of golden rule idea, but this has many political and economic ramifications, certainly as well. We have a book called The Messed Up Market. This is based on human action. So all of these books, by the way, for those who don't know, are based off of classic books and essays and resources, so that when the kids are done reading, it's like, hey mom, hey dad, or hey teenager, if you're older, go check out the original book if you want to get some more depth. So this is, if you can imagine, if you've ever tried to read Human Action by Ludwig von Mises, it's this very dense, economic tome that's difficult to get through. And so now you can get the Reader's Digest version. We've got a book all about education. So this is the Education Vacation, how we as humans learn, how true learning happens. It doesn't happen through pump or dump. In fact, Christina, I'm going to put you on the spot. I was at this event. I spoke to about 350-ish private school teachers last Friday in Jackson, Mississippi, and I did this with them. So I'm going to do it with you. They did okay. I want you to finish this sentence. Mitochondria is the.
Oh God.
Do you remember this one?
Building block of life.
Oh, close. Mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell.
Oh,
That's what
go.
like all these, third and fifth graders are all taught. This was drilled into my head. And,
sure.
And so it's like, is that the best way to teach stuff, right? Like, do we ever need to remember, like I did this as a kid all the time, raise my hand. Why do we need to know this? When are we ever going to use this? And the teacher would just say, put your hand down. It's important to learn.
Yep.
The past participle subjunctive of the English language, or like all these random things. And so this book is an exploration of, how does true learning actually happen, rather than this kind of conveyor belt where all children must learn in the same way at the same time, the same facts, and this very industrial model of modern schooling that we have. What does true education actually look like? I'll share two more. I don't have all the books here with me right now. One of them is the Tuttle Twins and their spectacular show business. This is our book all about entrepreneurship. So even going in detail over like a business plan. And so the twins go through this whole elaborate example where they write on all these papers. They're figuring out like, what do they know? What resources do I have? Who can help me? What are the different opportunities that we have, and getting kids to think entrepreneurially. We've had a lot of kids go start little businesses after reading this book, which is super fun to hear about, that they're inspired. Our most recent book, and then I'll end here, is the Tuttle Twins and the Leviathan Crisis. This is modeled after Bob Higgs's book from the 80s called The Crisis of Leviathan, where he looks at the past several decades before he wrote the book of Western society, and showing all of these examples where when a crisis happens, Leviathan, or the state, the government, grows. We've seen this, of course, with COVID, right? This thing happens, oh, give us all this power, let us lock down, shut down the economy, vaccine passports and all these things. We saw with 9/11, we still have the TSA and domestic terrorism and all these different things, the Patriot Act. And so what he talked about in his book, Bob Higgs, was you get this, he called it the ratchet effect, where, a ratchet kind of goes in one way and then you bring it back and then it goes the other way. And so the ratcheting of government to grow and grow and grow, but never recede. And so our book we decided to write this one just because it was so pertinent to what is happening right now, and the fact that people trade away their liberty for security and safety, and they ask the government to, help us and save us. And the government says, sure, just surrender your freedoms and I'll, save you. And then it grows and it never shrinks back down. We've got books now for toddlers, for teenagers, curriculum, a game, a podcast. Like, we're trying to create not even a cartoon. We're trying to create a content empire so that kids of any age, no matter how they like to learn, we've got something for them.
Yeah, and I love that you have an actual cartoon series now, because although I'm a big fan of having kids read books, sometimes you need to shake that up a little bit and give them something to watch. Or, now every kid seems to have a tablet or a phone. And I think it's fantastic that you're kind of hitting them from all angles. And I tell you, I wish I had these books when I was a kid. The way that I learned about entrepreneurship was through Ann M. Martin, and my friends and I started our own babysitters club business, which probably would be illegal today.
Do you have a permit for that?
I am pretty sure we didn't send money to the IRS when we made it. So I hope I don't get audited now that I admitted that live. But But, you've brought up a couple of really complex ideas. And I know that the point here is to take these books like Ludwig von Mises's Human Action, which I did read in college. I was an econ major. I'll tell you, I probably understood maybe a quarter of it. And of course, I was reading the English translation,
Right.
but nevertheless, it didn't seem like it at times. But you got human action. You've got concepts about fiat money and the Federal Reserve. And I'm just curious: do you really think that kids can learn these concepts? They're certainly not teaching them to school age kids these days in most public schools. Those concepts are very difficult even for adults to understand. I have tried to understand or to explain the Federal Reserve to grown adults who have never really thought much about where their money comes from and how government control over the money supply can affect their standard of living. And it's a hard thing to do. So how are you taking these really difficult books, even for adults, and presenting them to children in a way where they can actually grasp these concepts?
So I did an interview last night with Kyle Mann, who's the editor-in-chief of the Babylon Bee. And he was sharing the story of how, I think it was his 5-year-old, they had been reading some of the Tuttle Twins books, and his kid in the back seat of the car suddenly pipes out, was like, Dad, I get it. Taxation is bad. They're stealing our money, and he's like, my 5-year-old's learning these ideas. I get stories all the time from parents who are blown away. Of course, they know their kids firsthand experience and very intimately, and they are blown away at the comprehension level of these young children with these big ideas. And over the years of doing this, I was kind of dumbfounded, to be honest. Like I had that concern myself when we started these books. Are they really going to get these ideas? And how do we, so I think as I've over the years I've asked parents, what do you think is working? Why are your kids understanding this? How do you think it's helping? The story aspect is key. If we sit a 9-year-old down with a textbook all about the intricacies of the Federal Reserve, they're going to roll their eyes into the back of their head. They're not going to get it. But when it's this fun story about, someone stealing and making it so grandpa can't afford the price of movie tickets like he used to be able to, and all these things, there's a level of intrigue and mystery there that captures kids' imagination, and they see these complex ideas play out in a story where they have context now. If you sit your 11-year-old down and you start talking about spontaneous order, they don't have context for why that matters. But when you have a story about how pencils are made and how there's no pencil president, there's no pencil czar, right? And they read this fun story or watch the cartoon now of that episode, suddenly they have context. They get it. They may not be able to recall the term spontaneous order, but they'll understand that, the free market is this complex, amazing thing of people working together. And so I'm going to stay away from those crazy ideas that tell me otherwise, because I know, how this stuff works. I think too often we underestimate kids. When you look at most children's literature, it treats them at their age level or lower. It's fluff, it's junk, it's intellectually, like the equivalent of a marshmallow, right? It can fill you up, but you're not going to have proper nutrition or whatever. And it's just empty calories. And I think so often the materials that are produced for kids are like that. If you've ever, and if you haven't, any of the viewers, it's a fun experiment to go look up like 8th grade exams from a century ago, in school, and see what kids of yesteryear were expected to learn and know and comprehend. And it's amazing, right? I spoke with a donor last night who was bemoaning the fact that all his children who went to college were not as well educated as he was as a high school graduate of a really good school. We've had this dumbing down of our education system. One quick story, I shared this with these private school teachers I was talking to the other day. There was this commission put together of the National Commission on Education. And in fact, I got the little report right here, so I'll pull it up. They did this 18-month review of the education system in America, and they're trying to understand how things are going, how it's working, problems, opportunities, all that, just kind of an assessment. And this was done, mind you, in 1983. So it's been a little while since they did this. Here's what they said, 30 years ago. They said the educational foundations of our society are presently being eroded by a rising tide of mediocrity that threatens our very future as a nation and as a people. And then here's the kicker. They said, if an unfriendly foreign power had attempted to impose on America the mediocre educational performance that exists today, we might well have viewed it as an act of war. As it stands, we have allowed this to happen to ourselves. So then ask yourself, have the 30 years since that assessment seen a marked improvement in our education system, or a continued decline and descent into what they called mediocrity? I think the latter. I think it's gotten much worse. And so what I like is being part of the solution and saying, like, hey, parents, whether you homeschool or private school or doing charter, whatever it is that you're doing, right? Like, recognize that there's two problems in schools. One is sins of omission, as I call them. So this is the propaganda. This is teaching that, the founding fathers were all racist bigots, and, that America's, white supremacy, blah, blah, blah. Like, it's the propagation of ideas, these sins of commission. But then there's also sins of omission, where schools are not teaching something like free market economics or the foundational basics of property rights. John Locke and his influence on the founding fathers, life, liberty, property, all these things. Schools, by and large, are not teaching this. And so you've got sins of commission, sins of omission. And in light of that, the onus, I think, is on parents to say, okay, what am I going to do as a result? Even if my kids need to or are going to stay in the government's schools, fine. But here's what I'm going to do to kind of counteract those sins, as I call them. Here's what I'm going to do to supplement in the home and make sure my kids are learning these good values. And so that's where the Tuttle Twins is trying to help even those parents to say, even if your kids are over there in school getting some of this intellectual empty calorie stuff, make sure you're giving them some good nutrition in the home.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right about the sins of omission. I think we've been very focused, and rightly so, but a lot of folks have been focused lately on, what are sort of the lies or half truths or propaganda that, are being taught in schools today. But you're right, it's equally dangerous, if not more so, that we don't see basic economics. We don't see basic American history, frankly, critical thinking. And I know that that's another thing that you try to drive home in your Tuttle Twins series, is just kids are being taught, to learn sort of this propaganda and spew it back out. And they're not being taught to think for themselves. And I mean, I think some of that, has to be by design, right? I mean, if you want children to be raised a certain way, to think a certain way, and you're the state and you're teaching kids, you don't want them to be critical of those ideas or to question them. You just want them to parrot them back to you. And so, critical thought is absent in schools. And I think it's funny too, because even me, when I went to law school, I won't tell you how long ago that was, but I wanted to be a constitutional lawyer. I took all the constitutional law classes I possibly could, and I went to a very good law school. So it's not really a knock on my law school; it's more on the ABA and just the institutions. But not once in those 3 years was I asked to pick up the Constitution itself. I had taken dozens of constitutional law classes, but what we did is we read what judges said about the Constitution, or what, frankly, even politicians said about the Constitution. We weren't asked to pick up the Constitution and just read what it said. But yet when I went to undergrad at Hillsdale College, and I feel like Tuttle Twins would probably be very well received at a place like Hillsdale College. There, every single student had to read the Constitution to graduate, regardless of whether you were, pre-law or economics, or you were going into the sciences. And I think it goes back to that critical thinking and just understanding what are American values and what does it mean to be an American. So I think it's fantastic that's what your series is going for. But we have a question from a viewer, and it's, should the goal be to get the government completely out of education? And I think that sort of goes to, you've got this excellent supplement that you've created. Is that enough? Or do we need to actually change our institutions to get government out of education, or at least to get kids out of the government education system so that they can be exposed to more of the Tuttle Twins and less of the other stuff?
When I hear from parents who talk about what they call failures of the public school system, I try and listen and let them kind of vent, and I nod my head in agreement because I come from a similar background and mindset. But then I try and turn it around and I say, I think you're actually approaching this from the wrong perspective. I don't think those are failures of the school system. I don't think those are bugs. I think they're features. I think they are successes. And what do I mean by that? If you look at the people who created the modern school system, the John Deweys and the Horace Manns and the John Goodlads, these people who were the architects of America's modern school system, it was born out of this Prussian era militaristic industrial process where they could take people of different religious and cultural backgrounds in the melting pot of America and homogenize them into kind of one standard, one kind of conformist kind of status. And they could then put them into this batch process to mold them and shape them into their ideal version of what society is and should be. If you look at it from the lens of the people who set up the system that kids are now in, you would say that it's a success, that the critical race theory and all these things happening are a specific and intentional byproduct of the way the system is set up. So really, when it comes to the individual asking the question, what should the goal be? I think that really depends on what is your worldview. If you want to produce a generation of subservient, submissive citizens who pledge allegiance to the flag at the age of 5 without having any idea what it even means, who go through behaviors because they're told and expected to do them, who don't question authority, right? Who regurgitate information and on command can repeat things. Those are automatons, right? Those are effectively intellectual robots who are pre-programmed to be a certain way. Now, I'm a religious person, and as a dad, I don't want that for my children personally. I don't want my kids to be imprinted with someone else's designs. I believe that God has something special for my children, their own life, destiny, journey, whatever you want to call it. And I think it's my job to help my children uncover what that is, discover themselves, their unique talents, their goals, etc. Personally, I believe that the public schooling system is not conducive to that goal. That's my goal, right? And so because that's my goal and my worldview, I think public schooling is in many ways an enemy. And so I think that it's doing a disservice to many children. Now, if you approach it from a different worldview, you could come to a different conclusion, which is why I think this really comes down to what are your values, what are your goals for your children, and take an honest assessment of how well that institution is going to do to help you achieve those ends, right? I think of, at least it's been a decade or two since homeschoolers were often kind of criticized or picked on because, oh, you're socially weird and, you're not well-rounded and so forth. And now we have pictures from kids in band practice at school, and they're all in these little tents playing their saxophone and they've got their walls everywhere. And it's like, you think we're weird? Look at all this stuff happening in the schools. But more importantly to that, right? I am a product of public school myself. I work with many teachers through Libertas Institute. I know very well how modern schools are, and they are rampant, full of bullying, right? Of pornography, sexual stuff, drugs, all the rest. And I think as a parent, and not to say anything of all the intellectual problems and those sins of omission and commission that we talked about. And so for me, the question is that an environment I want to place my children in during their most formative years and have all those pressures and problems, or can we explore an alternative? Again, I recognize that some families don't have alternative opportunities because of financial considerations or other things, which is why I say whatever hand you've been dealt with, figure out how to play the best hand possible. Even if you can't homeschool, maybe that means, again, supplementing in the home. More specifically, Christina, to your question, no, I don't think Tuttle Twins is it or is enough. I think we need 50 more organizations and people out there producing content, creating curriculum, doing things, because we face a monumental challenge. And even for all the millions of kids reading Tuttle Twins books, there are so many more out there we have not yet reached and may never be able to reach, but someone else can. And so for me, it's like this call to hey, call to arms, we need people, we need help, because I think it is a worthy fight. And I think for too long, our organizations like ours and many others around the world have neglected the rising generation. We typically wait until people are adults to engage them, till when they're voters. We surrender to this system for so long to expose them to their ideas and turn them into little, social justice warrior type people. And then we'll go talk to them as adults and voters. And so I think we need to reframe everything across our whole freedom movement and recognize that we need to support families in teaching their children and raising a future of freedom fighters that can help us, fight back for the values that we believe in.
Yeah. And, I think that we aren't alone in hoping for that. I think that if the past couple of years have taught us anything, it's that parents and the general public are hungry for just what you're describing, because, our organizations, Goldwater and Libertas, we've been working on school choice for a very, very long time. I mean, we just had the decade anniversary of education savings accounts, which,
yep.
Allow parents to custom design education for their kids, whether it be a different form of public school or private school or homeschooling or tutoring or whatever. And I know that Utah you kind of kicked it off. You had a really great victory for school choice back in 2020. And then everything kind of just exploded. And these last couple of years, especially this year, it's the years for school choice. Dozens of
Totally.
states adopted either education savings accounts or voucher programs or, tuition scholarships or things like that. And for as long as our organizations have been working on that, I think the concept is finally being vindicated that people want to be empowered to choose the right education for their kids, whether it be based on, their unique abilities or interests or whatever else. So I think it's a really exciting time. And I think it's great that you sort of got out at, before all of this. Tuttle Twins have been around, for a while now. So these were already ready to go, plug and play for parents who are starting to wake up and realize that they need something else for their kids. But you said Tuttle Twins is not the end. It's sort of just the beginning. So another viewer question that we have is, what other books besides Tuttle Twins, once our viewers have purchased those and their kids have read them all, what else would you recommend to be able to teach, free market ideas or concepts of individual liberty specifically to children?
Yeah, it's tough. There's not a lot to recommend, which is why we started doing this to begin with. I'm a big fan of the Uncle Eric books. Those are for kind of preteens, probably. So like Whatever Happened to Penny Candy, for example, Whatever Happened to Justice. So those are the Uncle Eric books. There's other books out there too, where they'll just kind of do one or two books. I know like Julie Borowski has a couple books. She has one, I think it's called Nobody Knows How to Make a Pizza. And so it's her version of the iPencil story. And then she has another one as well. The challenge is, I think that, most authors, just so the viewers kind of have a little data point for reference, most authors, if you kind of take the whole market of writing books, most authors sell fewer than 500 books. It's writing a book is a very difficult thing, because for most people, they write the book and then they put it on Amazon or whatever, but that's kind of the extent of what they do. And so, some friends and family buy the book, and, some people who follow them on social media, but then it kind of peters out. So it's very difficult to sell a lot of books. You have to really be effective at marketing. So we spend every year several $1 million on marketing our books. It is a kind of big machine that we do to get them out there, because for me, this is a mission. Like I need to reach and teach as many kids as possible. And to do that, I have to do ads, and I have to get influencers, and I have to get Glenn Beck on his radio program talking about him like he does, and all these things, because I know that for a lot of people, it takes like 6 or 7 or 8 times to hear something before you're finally like, oh yeah, maybe I should go, look at that website finally. I've heard a few people talking about it. And so that requires this just ongoing repetition of marketing to keep it top of mind for people, so that for new people who are not yet exposed to it. And so there are a smattering of single books out there that you can find. But what we're trying to build is a campaign, basically, that has like this marketing engine to just reach as many people as possible. As I said earlier, right now we've got books for toddlers, we've got books for teenagers, we're doing the podcast, the cartoon. We're trying to create this very well-rounded blend of resources so that no matter the kid's age, we've got not just one book or a few books for them, but a lot of resources for them. We have curriculum as well. Because I recognize that so many parents out there, they come to us, they're like, well, what else is out there? Like, well, here's other resources that we have, and we can point you to some of these random other books. But what we found is a lot of families get underwhelmed by like a standalone book or two. They want they want something more beefy. They want curriculum, they want guidebooks, they want activity workbooks, they want like a plan and something that's more substantive than just a random book here or there. And so that's, especially in the past couple of years, what we've been trying to accelerate the production of is a lot of these additional resources. So it's not just these standalone books. It's, okay, well, we've got, now we have parent guides. So the parents, can learn alongside and answer their kids' questions and stuff like that. So we're trying to be very robust in how much we create to help support those families.
Yeah, that's great. And, what you said about publishing a book and getting it read, I completely understand that. I co-authored. I have only written half a book, unlike your multiple dozens of books that you've written. But I co-authored one with my husband Tim Sandefur, right, who also works in the freedom movement. For those who don't know, although I'm sure people recognize his name, he's written, I think, probably as many as you have, Connor. The two of you are very prolific, in addition to all the work you do in your day jobs. But for me, just writing half, it took a lot of time. But then, you're right. It's a real struggle for anyone to find, even a publisher, much less get the information out there to the general public when everyone's being inundated with so much content. And it seems to me that it's especially hard for people who are libertarian or conservative or on the right. There are really only so many companies or publishers that will even touch books like that. And so what hope do folks have? I mean, you just mentioned that you spend millions of dollars marketing Tuttle Twins. You've been very successful. What if somebody else, what if one of our viewers right now has a great idea for a children's book? How do they even go about getting that into publication? How do they even have any hope of reaching your level of success? What would you say to someone who says, I'd really like to follow in your footsteps and do something like this?
When we did our first book, or we're in the middle of doing our first book, I approached children's books publishers to say, hey, we've got this idea for this series. Here's some examples we're working on. And they told me, by and large, hey, cool idea. We just don't do anything political. And then I would approach political publishers, the Regnerys of the world and others who do a lot of like conservative leaning type of books. And I would say, hey guys, we got this idea. And they would say, hey, cool idea. We just don't do anything for kids. And so I found myself caught in the middle. And I am so happy it ended that way. It forced us to, of necessity, figure out this self-publishing kind of game. But it was so amazing because this is a mission for us, because we're trying to reach as many people as possible, get people to share it with their friends and so forth. There's power in the list. What I mean by that is at the early stages, I realized that by doing it ourselves, by figuring out the process, we would know every single customer of our books. We didn't even list on Amazon. We just only sold them through our website. And I did that because I wanted to know everyone who bought book number 1, so that when book number 2 was out, I could tell them, hey guys, get the second book, and then start to kind of compound and grow our audience. And it was such an effective way, right? Because if you list on Amazon, you have no clue who's buying your books. You're throwing it out to the wind and hoping that someone will see it. And if you publish another book, you hope that someone will think at some point, oh, I ought to come back and see if Bob has written any, new books. But if you've got contact information and the ability to communicate directly with your audience, it's so powerful. And so what I field probably 1 or 2 calls a week from aspiring authors who ask a similar question to you have. And what I tell them is, first, you need a website, and you need to start talking about it, blogging about it, sharing on social media about it, right? And start to capture people's information. Hey, would you like updates when this book is out? Leave your email address. I'll give you a free, ebook when it comes out. You really need to start thinking through marketing, because to me, it's to put in all the effort to give birth to this, book, and then to let it gather dust or not serve its full purpose of being read and changing the lives of so many people. To me, that seems like an unproductive use of my time to create something that cannot rise to its, full and highest purpose. And so the biggest challenge, look, anyone out there thinking of writing a book, you'll figure it out. It has never been easier to self-publish a book, and with high quality. There's ample resources and YouTube videos, and just spend a few hours researching online. You'll figure it out. There are many services, businesses, websites that can help you. Where many authors go wrong is they don't think through the marketing piece. It's, okay, once I've written the book, once I've published the book, how do I reach people? How do I get them to buy? And so for that, you really need to study marketing. I'll mention a book for anyone who's interested. The best resource I've seen to share is a book by Russell Brunson, and it's called .com Secrets. And it's basically it's like online marketing 101, how to start thinking as a marketer and kind of building your own marketing engine. I tell the people I talk to, as I say once or twice a week, I say, you need to think of yourself as like 1/6 author, 5/6 marketer. Like, if you really want to do this well and do it right, you got to figure out how to just shout from the rooftops what you're doing, how to connect with people, where to find people, how to grab their attention. And so, I mean, it's the same with our policy work, Christina, with Goldwater and Libertas. There's so much noise out there. How do you get people to watch your videos, read your policy papers, come to a webinar, with Christina and Connor? We have to, I feel like for those of us who care about freedom, we have to get better at selling it, at attracting people to it, at presenting it a certain way that's appealing and enticing. And so I think our whole movement could stand to improve in learning marketing lessons and figuring out how to connect directly with people to get them to be motivated to engage with us.
I couldn't agree more. And, one of the things I'm really proud of about both of our organizations, Connor, is that we really focus the majority of our work on, how can we create solutions that will improve people's lives and give them more freedom and empower them to live the American dream that they want to live. And in your books are doing the same thing. It's a positive solution that actually changes people's lives versus, a whole lot of noise that exists out there that, just very negative or very reactive, or complaints that aren't really offering up solutions. And I really do think, even though it can seem, if you spend time on social media or if you turn on most news stations, it can seem that the world is in disarray. People are very angry and people respond to negativity and complaining. I truly believe that for most Americans, the opposite is true. I think they're tired, especially over the last couple of years, of anger, of complaints, of, fear of indoctrination. And I think when you give them, an opportunity, like with the Tuttle Twins, to learn, to share something with their children, or you make a policy change that allows them to take more control over their own lives. I mean, I think there is a real hunger for that as well. So kudos to you for doing that, both through Libertas and also through the book series.
Thank you.
And we do have another question now from a viewer going back to the book series. They'd like to know why Tuttle Twins? Where did the name come from? Does it have any particular significance?
Oh, this is a fun one. So I'm a marketing guy. I've had to learn a lot about marketing over the years. And so when we created the series, I said, this is for kids. So I want there to be a boy and a girl so that, both boys and girls could relate. So let's do twins. And then, okay, well, I want alliteration. I want the last name to be a T, but it's got to be like 1 or 2 syllables because kids have to be able to pronounce it. So then I looked online at like most common last names that start with a T, and I whittled down the list. And I narrowed it down to like 3 to 5, I remember. And so then I went through and I said, okay, is the .com available, right? So like whatever, I don't even remember what they were. So like the Terry twins or the Thompson twins, like .com, right? Where are the websites available? And was there anyone famous that had that last name? I don't remember what the last name was because it's been 7 years, but I remember one of the names I looked up. It was like a couple of like Sports Illustrated bikini model type girls. I'm like, no, I can't touch that one, And so the Tuttle Twins, the .com was available. There was no one famous who were Tuttle Twins, which for search engine purposes, right, like was very helpful for us to kind of grab that and use it. Rolls off the tongue easy. So it was just a total kind of reverse engineered process to figure out what we would use.
I love that. That's very strategic. And I think people sometimes don't realize, just how much strategery goes into making these types of decisions. So that's fantastic. Well, before we're getting close to the hour, but before we go, just tell us a little bit more. I mean, we've focused a lot on the main series, the 12 books, but you alluded to the fact that there's a cartoon and there's some other books for younger children. What's on the horizon, if you know, or if you can say what's sort of next for the Tuttle Twins parents who are getting into this or getting their kids interested? What do they have to look forward to?
So yeah, a lot more books, a lot more cartoon episodes. I'll share the big project we're working on. I've started mentioning this publicly a little bit, but not many people know. So you guys are among the privileged few to learn what we're working on. So I went, in fact, I don't know that anyone from Goldwater was there, but we were in this meeting about 1.5 years ago with a few groups who are involved in kind of civic education. So the Bill of Rights Institute and, Fee was there and a couple others. And the purpose was like, hey guys, like, what are we doing? The so-called left is doing all this critical race theory, 1619 project, whatever. And I came away from that meeting I was underwhelmed. There was no desire to really collaborate among the groups. There was no clear kind of like united front. Everyone was kind of off on their own lane. And flying home on the plane, I came up with an idea for a new project for Tuttle Twins, which we're now working on. To validate this project, I went on eBay and Amazon and I bought about 12 social studies books that are used in schools, most of the schools across the country, for like 4th to 8th grade roughly. And I needed to validate my theory, which was that kids are not being taught substantive history. They're being taught superficial history, dates of battles and what type of cannons were used and who said what at which convention and all these like factoids that, again, empty calories, like important, right? Like interesting. Maybe at a party you could impress people with, your American history knowledge. But I'll give you a redeeming opportunity, Christine, another little audience participation here. Let's see if you can finish this sentence. Those who don't learn from the past
are doomed to repeat it.
There you go. You've redeemed yourself. Okay. So here's the problem. Kids today are not taught at all to learn from the past. They are taught about the past, almost as if we're walking the rising generation through this museum of American history and telling them on the way to the cafeteria, oh, hey, look, these were uniforms they wore. And look, these were utensils they ate with. And okay, kids, let's go to lunch. And it's this very passive, context-free, unhelpful way of teaching history. I submit that's among the reasons, probably at the top, of why we seem to be repeating the mistakes of the past, why socialism is so popular once again. For all the social studies and history teaching that's being done, we're not teaching kids how to learn from the past. So we are working on a Tuttle Twins history book. It's effectively going to be a whole bunch of Tuttle Twins books into one, where we're going to go through early colonial America all the way through the Constitution. And yes, we'll mention, this battle happened and here's what Washington did or whatever, but our emphasis is going to be on the ideas, the philosophy, the motivations of these people, what it was like for them to deal with feeling powerless against, the most powerful force in the world. I mean, imagine, I'll give you one example that comes to mind. When we talk about, okay, here's an example. When we talk about the Bill of Rights, the Fourth Amendment, as you well know, right, is the right to be free from searches and seizures. It requires a warrant, probable cause, before a judge, particularity, which means they can't just go search through Christina's whole home if they think it's just, in her vehicle or in her garage, what they're after. And so, as you know, Christina, the Fourth Amendment was born out of the frustration that founding fathers had with writs of assistance, which was effectively permission slips that the redcoats would write themselves to search entire homes, entire blocks of homes. And the founders detested this kind of unilateral, invasive authority. So they created the Fourth Amendment. All right. So imagine when we're talking to kids about the Fourth Amendment and the Bill of Rights, imagine holding up a phone and saying, oh, hey, let me talk to you about the NSA, right? Or Edward Snowden or whatever, and mentioning modern examples of surveillance and the FISA court and all these things where the tension that they had then can inform the tension and the struggles we have today, right? It was a different thing, different people, different fact patterns, but the concepts are very relatable and we can learn from history and apply it to today. Those are the things that we're trying to work on in our history book so that kids can have a more substantive knowledge of American history and hopefully help us not repeat the mistakes of the past and be doomed to that fate, because we can now teach the rising generation about those core ideas, the John Lockean kind of individualist philosophy, property rights and everything else, the economics, the trade barriers, the tariffs, all these things that happen, and talk about the interventions of government and how they cause these problems and so forth. So our goal is to have this out for the next 4th of July. So we're working really hard on it right now. It's a really big project. And then we're going to have companion curriculum and so forth as well. And then over time, we want to partner with schools to get this adopted in schools and used as kind of their official text. But for me, it's the problem is very clear. No one has really been working. Like Hillsdale, I think, has recently come out with some interesting curriculum that we've been looking at. But even still, getting even more substantive into the ideas and the philosophy, which even they don't really touch as much as kind of the facts and events of history. And so that's kind of a little peek behind the scenes. It's something that we're working on.
That is incredibly exciting, Connor. I really look forward to that. And I sort of feel like we have a little bit of a heard it here first moment for viewers. So that is very exciting. Well, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. This has been a fantastic discussion. I am a huge fan of the books. I will say too, for viewers, if you're not familiar with the Tuttle Twins books and you don't have children or know any that you can purchase them for, I'm sure you know somebody, but if you don't, get a set for yourself. They're really fun. And I'll tell you, you will learn something yourself just from reading them. They're a lot of fun. The illustrations are fantastic. So I could not recommend them enough. And again, to remind viewers, if you are listening and you want to make a purchase for yourself or for your children or for children of a friend for the holidays, just visit TuttleTwins.com. So that's www.tuttletwins.com and use the special coupon code Goldwater. You'll get 40% off a set of 12 books. So hurry up and do that. I think there's still time before the holiday season is over. And I also just wanted to, since we are approaching the holidays, I wanted to thank everybody who is listening for all of your support throughout the year for the Goldwater Institute. We're able to put on events like this, and we're able to go into capitals and courtrooms and communities across the country and fight for American values and fight for freedom and fight for transparency in the classroom and people's right to be able to choose the right education for their own children because of support from folks like you. So we really appreciate our Goldwater family. And, as you're making your year-end plans and the holidays are coming, we would be very honored if you would consider us. And if you'd like to make a gift to the Goldwater Institute, please visit goldwaterinstitute.org. And if you have a lingering question for Connor that did not get answered, please feel free to email us at events@goldwaterinstitute.org, and we will make sure to harass Connor and track him down and get him to answer your questions. So thank you again, Connor. Thank you so much for joining us, for all the work that you do fighting for freedom. It really is a pleasure to call you a colleague in liberty, and I hope you have a great holiday season.
Likewise, and keep up the great work. Thank you, Christina.
All right. Thanks a lot. Thank you all.